morning, afternoon, night. This is We Are Not Prepared, and we are your hosts, Byron
and Mark Ivy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to We Are Not Prepared. Byron is out, and still sitting to my right, Brigadier General Ben T. Robinson.
Retired.
Retired. Thanks for sticking around, Ben. And if I can just start, the 9/11, just you've mentioned war, you mentioned 9/11. Tell me what, this is a broad question, tell me what civilians need to know about war. What are we not understanding? Just the significance of what that means.
Well, that's an important question because I think a lot of people believe that soldiers make decisions about war. They don't. Going to war is not a military decision; it's a political decision. Generals don't decide to go to war. Presidents, Congress. They're the ones that decide to go to war. No general decided to go to Vietnam. No general decided to go to Afghanistan. Those are all political decisions. So war is about politics by a more violent means, and war is the last resort to politics. Political decisions that result in violent means are called war. And there are very few servicemen, soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen that want to go to war because war is about risking your life. War is about separation from family. War is about ending up with some severe wounds, and you don't have to watch too much television to see the severely wounded warriors. And when I came back from Vietnam, people had... Yes, they had realized that political decisions were what put us in war, but the warriors suffered. You can hate war, and we all should hate war, but you can't hate the warrior. You can't hate the person who is sent off to do the bloodiest, most violent thing that a country wants them to do is kill other people. And you can't hate them for it because they're doing something that they're serving their country. They're serving the leadership of their nation. They're serving the people. Going to Afghanistan and fighting Al-Qaeda was something that we had to do because we were attacked. And a political decision was made by then President George Bush to go in and take these people out that had, not for a purpose of revenge, but for we've got to keep our nation strong and safe, and as long as these people are there, we're not safe, And what shocked us all was the fact that they were able to do it the way they did it. No one has a uniform that's flying these airplanes into the World Trade Center. They're all what we would have considered non-combatants. They're non-government actors, and yet they attacked America. Well, then we stand back and realize, okay, if those are the people that attacked us, you can't identify them. So it became a whole new area of concern for America is the non-military players, the non-organization government players that could attack America.
Was that war a success, looking back on it now?
I think that the success of it was the acknowledgement of it. And I think that the memory, there's a half-life to American memory, and it doesn't seem to be very long because it didn't take too long to understand how terrorists changed the philosophy and the safety and the thought of your country.
No rules.
No rule. In fact, it still lives today in America. Every time you go to an airport and you go through TSA, that is all part of what happened in 9/11. And what is amazing now is young people see what is going on between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah, and they don't seem to understand that this is a terrorist country, a terrorist organization that attacked Israel, and they want free Palestine. Palestine was basically free up until October 7th. And they create a situation where Palestine put themselves at risk as a result of a terrorist organization called Hamas. So, and this was something that now the Israelis are having to deal with, and they're dealing with it in very violent means. And it's heartbreaking to see how the Palestine cities and homes are destroyed as a result of their willingness to support a terrorist organization.
Is it political that even the decision for the U.S. to get involved, whether that's Ukraine, whether it's the war going on in Hamas or with Hamas, and because I see headlines of we're sending supplies, especially Ukraine. Is that political, or what's the benefit? Where does the United States benefit of getting into that? Because I feel like civilians struggle understanding that sometimes.
So most Americans, especially young people of the last 30 years, do not understand the Soviet Union and then Russia and the threat against NATO and the threat against, as NATO, America. The Russians were once upon a time, not that long ago, willing to bury us. In fact, one of their senior leaders, the senior leader, said, "We will bury America." So it kind of goes back to that. We need to make sure that Russia, the former Soviet Union, but the Russian mindset and Putin doesn't threaten NATO, by threatening NATO, threaten the United States and pull us into a war through an alliance. So yes, that's a political decision. The players are political leadership in NATO, political leadership in America, political leadership in Russia, and political. Russian military doesn't want to dominate. China military doesn't want to dominate. It's the Chinese leaders and the Russian leaders and foreign leaders and terrorist leaders that are wanting to have some kind of a world domination. It's not the military. So yes, those decisions are all political decisions. And I'm now convinced that it's justified that Russia wants to dominate Uruguay. And I don't think, if you see how poorly Russia is performing in this war with the Ukraine, you understand that Russia is not going to be able to take over NATO. They're just not going to. So the one thing that Russians has, that Russian leadership, Putin has, is the nuclear weapon. We want to avoid any kind of nuclear exchange, even at the tactical level. A tactical level is a battlefield nuke that would be dropped into Ukraine to kill a bunch of Ukrainian forces. That could lead to a response in kind, which Ukraine doesn't have a nuclear weapon, but they can get one.
I read a book by Annie Jacobson called Nuclear War. In it, she said, so if there's a nuke launched to the U.S., there's someone who is responsible for flagging it, and then if it passes like the first level of like this is real, then it gets reported to the president, and at that second, there's 5 minutes for the president to decide if he's going to launch back, which changes. I mean, that decision is everything.
And
have you heard that?
Yeah, I was in Cheyenne Mountain for 3 years, and Cheyenne Mountain is where all that takes place.
I'll be there in a month.
So they would, and our exercises were.
Can you give me a special pass to get down there and check things out?
Cheyenne Mountain pretty much is closed now, except for the tourists. If you're
that's
going,
what they say.
Yeah. So, but we would exercise, and a missile would launch, and then pretty some more missiles, and we respond massively, and in 30 minutes the world had been destroyed. Which is something we got to avoid. And could that start with a single nuke weapon being used in Ukraine? Sure, yes, it could. Russia uses a nuke in Ukraine, and the NATO people see, okay, this is something we can't tolerate. We need to do something about Russia, and the exchange escalates. And China says, well, we're kind of aligned with Russia. And then pretty soon they throw a nuke at us, and then this mutual assured destruction starts to take place, and it quickly goes out of control. But yes, the president is the one, the suitcase, the football that he carries around. It's got those codes in it that the president can authorize the response, nuclear response. There's a thing called response in kind. And it has to do, if you fire a nuke at us, we're going to fire a nuke back at you. But then there's kind of other uses of nukes, of which I, having spent time in Cheyenne Mountain, I'm a little sensitive to, and that's the country that doesn't have a strategic nuclear attack against the United States, but a strategic nuclear attack against forces of the United States, and the ones I'm talking about primarily are the space forces. It wouldn't be that difficult to fire a missile into low Earth orbit. Once it's ignited, would wipe out our satellites. The destructive force initially, a certain number of satellites, but then now you got a big old cloud of nuclear charged energy that all the satellites are going to fly through. All the low Earth orbit satellites are going to all fly through it, and it destroys communication. So
submarines too.
Nuclear charged particles, and that the that's why satellites are to some extent are hardened against electromagnetic pulse. So now they used the nuke, but it wasn't a mass destruction. They didn't kill a bunch of people. They destroyed a bunch of stuff. Is that something where we want to have a nuclear exchange with them? No. And some of these renegade countries, they don't have a big satellite network. So how do you respond against someone who doesn't have the same capability they just destroyed on our side?
Here's the big question. I read a headline the other day about North Korea. How do you stop this nuke? It was it says North Korea launches poop balloon across the border. So I read into it. So South Korea sends balloons over there with like USB sticks of like movies and everything North Korea is not allowed to have. And so I guess they started launching balloons full of poop back over, and I was like, "That's a heck of a nuclear program they got going." It's
kind of an interesting thing, because when I was at Cheyenne Mountain, what my organization was tracking all the debris in space, and the Russians, their manned spacecraft didn't have chemical toilets the way ours do, so they just kind of put it in a Ziploc bag and throw it out the window. So imagine driving down the interstate in your Winnebago, and all of a sudden, boom, this bag of poop hits your windshield and suddenly turns brown. Well, that's kind of the same thing, except this stuff is frozen and it's moving at 17,000 miles an hour. Oh, man,
it's a
and all of a sudden, asteroid. This isn't a bird strike. This is a poop strike on the windshield of the space shuttle, which goes completely, and everything is now turned brown. And so there's ways to create havoc against others that you're trying to figure out, what do we do about it? I mean, what do we do about it? I mean, when people fly airplanes into the World Trade Center, who did it? What do you do about it? I mean, is there a country that you can attack, or is there forces that you can attack, and what do they look like?
Do you remember how you felt when you saw the plane in the second? So was it immediate business?
That morning at 8:00, we're hosting the associate commanders of Tinker. So this is the 552nd, the AWACS wing is hosting the Air Base wing, the Navy wing, the 3rd Communications Group, the Canadians, the new hospital commander. So we're going to give them a presentation about what it is that we do. And we do this among all the associate commanders, so we get an idea of what all do we do on Tinker. 8:00, and then 9:00, we're going to go into this stand-up I was telling you about. That's what flew yesterday, today, and tomorrow. My secretary comes in, and we're starting to assemble, and there's a bunch of room of colonels, and my secretary says a terrible accident in New York City. And she turns on the TV we have there in the conference room, and we're sitting there watching this thing. We just, and several of us are pilots. We say, how could this possibly have happened? You know, big airplanes just don't wander into New York City and run into buildings. You know, something significant went wrong. And as we're sitting there, we see the second airplane hit. And universally around the room, we all said, we're at war.
Immediately.
Somebody is attacking us. Let's get out of here and let's get down to our own headquarters and let's figure out what's going on and let's take appropriate action. We immediately called, and with an AWACS, called the Senior Battle Staff, which is the squadron commanders, the group commanders, the wing commander, senior staff, the intel officer. and to discuss what are we going to do. We know we have been involved in every single conflict America's been involved with since 1977. So there's no doubt we're going to be involved in this. So meeting didn't last long. We looked at this, and then we said, okay, stop all launches. Start triaging crews that are duty not to include flying head codes, whatever. Start building crews, as many crews as we can build, 17 people to a crew, get them in crew rest, make sure we got airplanes that are cocked and ready to go, and let's be prepared for when the phone starts ringing, and it's going to start ringing pretty darn quick.
Is Tinker locked down or not? Somewhat not like locked down, but
Yeah.
What?
Yes,
defense.
They locked.
Oh,
down.
they did.
Yeah, they pretty much locked down.
So what's if Tinker is a target? So 9/11 happens. What does Tinker do to make sure nothing happens to that Air Force base?
Well, the first thing to do is to close the gates.
Yeah.
There's at 8:00 in the morning, people that are coming through the gates are not coming through the gates to go to work. Those people are already there.
I used to work.
So now they may be coming to go to the commissary, go to bed, get a haircut, whatever, go play golf, go bowling. We don't need those people on the base. They're just so. It's not that they're bad people. It's just that we need to control the environment, shut down the base, get the security police out to check, make sure there's no intrusion through the fences, put extra security on the flight line. Tinker is going to be a big target primarily because the AWACS wing is there. AWACS wing is immediately responsive to the Air Force, whereas the depot, its response time is maybe 5-6 months from now because the airplanes are going to be out there, are going to be in the field 5 or 6 months. But AWACS airplanes are going to be in the field immediately, within hours. So AWACS is going to be a big target. By the time we had stopped our flying on that morning by 8:15, 8:30 U.S. time, we're sitting there when the airplane hits the Pentagon. And I was calling, we were watching CNN back in those days. And then pretty soon wasn't a couple hours later that the airplane Shanksville goes down, United 93. There was a feeling that airplane had been shot down, that we knew the airplane was headed to Washington to attack the Capitol, the White House, and that we'd shot it down.
I read, I don't know if they're rumor. I mean, no civilian knows, but online they said Secret Service or some type, maybe military, were on top of the White House with weapons that had never been seen by man. Yeah. What do you know?
Yeah, they're
allowed to talk about that?
Stingers, surface-to-air missiles, Stingers. And then there was restrictions. There still are restrictions, or at least I know that that an airplane coming in has got to be in a certain corridor. If it gets out of that corridor, it's considered apprehensive. You cannot get out of your seat for 30 minutes prior to landing at Washington National. So you're restricted to your seat because it was just take every single precaution in abundance to protect Washington, D.C., the Capitol, the White House. So apparently the last thing I said, and I didn't even know I said it at the time, I said, we know what to do now, let's just go do it. We had practiced these kind of scenarios, rapid get-out-of-town scenarios. So I said, let's meet back here at 9 o'clock, 45 minutes later. So we dispersed. What I knew that we had launched a couple of airplanes that morning. One airplane was in Florida. It was off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, and it launched around 6 o'clock to work with the Florida National Guard. Another airplane was on its way to North Carolina to work with the 4th Tech Fighter Wing. And the airplane in Florida was told to stand by, and it covered the president. So it flew escort to the president from Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, up to Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, and back into Washington that night. So this crew took off that morning on a routine training mission and ended up flying with the President of the United States all day. Another airplane was headed to North Carolina to work with a fighter wing there. They self-diverted to New York City, and they were told by the FAA to land immediately. The aircraft commander said, no, I'm not landing. I'm going to New York City. And he started working for NORAD, and he covered New York City, Washington, D.C. The fighters that you heard about over Washington, D.C. and New York, those were all controlled by an AWACS that took off from Tinker that morning. Third airplane was at McCord Air Force Base in Seattle, Tacoma.
When you say this, what's the purpose of these planes? So you're saying a plane leaves here, a plane leaves there. What's the purpose of that plane leave? Like, what are they going to do?
They're on, the big radar on top of it. It can see every airplane's out. So those fighters that are up there, they check in with the AWACS and they stand by, and AWACS will detect target.
So they're just patrolling, kind of.
They're patrolling. They're doing what they call battle management. Okay. So they've got these fighters. The fighters aren't working independently. The fighters are working through a command and control system, of which AWACS is the primary node in that command and control system. So back to the airplane at Tacoma, it's a training mission. It's a bunch of students on it with instructors. It's going to take off to fly a mission that morning. They were told to shut down, and the aircraft commander and the mission crew commander, the guy in the back charge of the back end, come into base ops, and they were handed a letter by a colonel and said, "I've never thought I'd ever see a letter like this before." Hands it to him, told him to read it. It's a letter signed by Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld on how to shoot down an airliner. The codes, how to instruct an Air Force, a military fighter, could be a Navy, could be a Marine, to shoot down an airliner, and it may not be a U.S. airliner. It may be some foreign nation. So that was kind of the first morning. That was the first couple of hours. If you look at the timeline from the time the first airplane hit until both towers collapsed, it's only about an hour and 45 minutes. It seemed like it was longer than that, but you look at the timeline, all this happened so fast. It's just incredible. So I'm on the phone continuously with the headquarters down at Tyndall Air Force Base in Panama City, Florida, and we're being told to send an airplane to Detroit, Chicago, send an airplane to Los Angeles, send an airplane to Disney World. All these are potential targets for airplanes that are out there. Imagine this table is the United States. From every part of this walls, airplanes are coming to the United States. 3,000 airplanes are in the air, all headed to the United States. FAA says, stop. Land short. Land immediately. Go turn around, go back to Venezuela, wherever you're from. And now they're trying to account for all these airplanes. Right. And there was 11 of them they couldn't find. So that morning I get a call and says, FAA says there's 11 airplanes that are still out there that are potential terrorist attacks. You may have to shoot down airplanes before the day's over. Well, they one by one, they would find out where they are. One had landed in Alaska, another was in Canada, another one turned around going back to Japan. Finally, they kind of go through all 11 airplanes and they find out where they are. Can you imagine that? You've got 3,000 airplanes. This is just the commercial airplanes. Then you have all the charter airplanes and all the private airplanes that are all out there. So there's a tremendous amount of potential attackers to some very lucrative targets. Can you imagine someone with a Cessna 172 flying into Disney World packed with explosives? I mean, we saw what the Mirror Building was like. Could that have happened? Yes, it could have. So now we're, and as we go on through it, we realize that every airplane we've got, it takes 4 airplanes to support a 24-hour orbit. We've got airplanes scattered out all over the world, and we are maximizing the number of airplanes we can get in the air. We're covering orbits all over the United States, and we're running out of airplanes. We're running out of people.
Since we got a little limited time, going back to when you started Vietnam, what was your experience when you got there? Was there a moment where you're like, this isn't good?
Yeah, that was a moment where I remember just shortly after the night I got to the unit I was in, we got attacked, a rocket attack. So I'm thinking, wow, this is real.
How old were you?
21.
21.
So, and I was kind of an old guy because I've been to college for 3.5 years when I flunked out. Remember that?
Yep.
Didn't drop out. Make sure we get this clear. And that I'd gone down to officers' records with a unit of assignment, and I had some time before my next appointment. And I went across the street to the chow hall and got a cup of coffee. I'm sitting there at this table thinking, I've got about 360 days left, and there was you could hear the battle going on every night. You could hear things firing going on every night. And I was in I Corps, which is very mountainous, and there's all these mountains around us, and you go to the club and people are telling war stories about what happened that day, and helicopters. I was a helicopter pilot, so helicopters were getting shot up. So I thought, God, what have I got myself into here, But I got to make the best of it. I'm going to be here for a year. I might as well figure out some way to survive this. Physically survive it, but mentally and emotionally survive it. I got to get past being afraid, and it wasn't so being afraid, it was being anxious. I guess it's being afraid.
Are you anxious when you're up in the chopper, or is
no, not so much. That kind of goes away. You got a job to do, and the most important thing to do is flying safely.
What was your job in the helicopter?
I was a pilot.
Yeah. So what was like? Give me an example of like. All right, you're going up. What's your mission when you're in the air?
I was fortunate, and there's Hueys. You probably know what a Huey is. It's the smaller utility helicopter. And then there were Chinooks. The Chinooks were the massive twin-rotored. Well, when I was coming out of Army pilot training, everybody's going to go to Vietnam. Everybody's a Huey pilot. So you can literally go from graduated from pilot training, got your wings, 30-day leave, and you're in Vietnam as a Huey pilot. So you're trained as a Huey pilot to go to combat in 30 days. A certain number of us, and I think there was 7 or 8, my class was 240, and I finished number 12 or 240, were assigned to follow-on training to a more advanced helicopter. So I guess that was a good deal. I didn't have anything to do with it. I assumed I was going to go to Vietnam as a Huey pilot, but I was selected for Chinook training. Very few, and I was a W1, brand new 1 officer. Very few W1s ever go to Chinooks. That's usually a second tour because it's a difficult airplane to fly. So I got to stay there for another 6 weeks going through Chinook training. So Chinooks are difficult to fly, but the mission isn't as dangerous as the Huey. Huey's very easy to fly, but it's got a dangerous mission. Your opportunity to get shot at a lot more. But
were you shot at?
Oh yeah, these people got guns.
Hey, real quick. Also, I'm always on eggshells when I'm talking to a veteran about, is it appropriate to ask, like, where's the line? I mean, I obviously know that you're not going to ask, like, have you ever, when it comes to, taking out an enemy, but is that appropriate to ask, were you shot at? Were you?
There's a lot of trauma involved in some of these things.
Right.
Personally, I'm not traumatized by any of that experience. I had some very positive experiences, and one of the things I talk about.
Meeting Forrest Gump?
I didn't meet Forrest Gump.
He wasn't in Vietnam when you were?
Well, but I met Newton. I met Fig Newton. And I talk about things that are positive about it because something's got to make you want to become part of the military when no one else wanted to be part of the military. I wanted to stay in. But I kind of enjoyed being around the people that I met. Mm-hmm. There was some incredibly honest, down-to-earth, diverse group of people. Yes, we were all a bunch of white guys, all a bunch of males, but yet at the same time, there was a guy from Washington, a guy from Coral Gables, Florida, a guy from Newton, Kansas, a guy, and the diversity of when you meet someone in Vietnam, the first question you ask is not what's your name, it's where you from. That's the most important question. Where are you from? And it's that where you're from is how relationships are established, not what your name is. So where you're from, I'm from Newton, Kansas. Really, what's that like growing up? Where in the hell is Newton, Kansas? Well, it's up by Wichita. Well, what's that like? What was that like? Did you play sports? How big was your high school? You have brothers and sisters. So it was the diversity of where you are from versus what is your name, What do you do? We know what you do. You do the same thing I do. So that was, so I just enjoyed being around the people, and I'm still very close to a lot of my friends from Vietnam. We have an annual reunion, and we've sponsored it, hosted it one time here in Oklahoma City. So I just kind of thought, I kind of want to be around these people. I kind of want to be in the military. So
and that tracks, and I know we're probably going to close it up, but I can tell that, General, with your work, post 2002, with the love for veterans, whether it's, I've seen it, your connection with Boeing, which has generated, funding for us to support veterans, whether they're blind or not. And then that's where, when I think of you, I think of serving your people,
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
General, I really appreciate you coming in and enlightening, our whoever's listening to this. We hope a lot of folks do, but thank you for being here. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this one. Sometimes it's fun not being silly. You know what I mean? So for myself, Mark Ivy, Brigadier General Robinson, retired, this has been We Are Not Prepared. See you next time.